Clara Johnson's fingers shook as she tried to force the metal latch of her old suitcase to close. The fabric bulged, clothes and books spilling out like it was resisting her. A faded shawl, once her mother's, slipped to the floor. She bent to pick it up, but her hands trembled so badly she only clutched it against her chest. From the kitchen came the scrape of a chair, the slam of a bottle. Her father's voice followed, thick with whiskey. "You're nothing but a burden. Let him take you. I've done my part." The words were sharper than any slap. Clara felt them slice into her chest. She tightened her jaw, swallowing the sting in her throat. She couldn't remember the last time he had looked at her without resentment. Tonight there was no fight left in him, only the desire to be rid of her. The front door creaked as she pushed it open. Rain had started, fine needles of water pricking her skin as she dragged the suitcase across the porch. The wood was slick, glistening under the weak glow of the lantern. A wagon waited at the edge of the yard, its wheels sunk slightly in the mud. Clara paused at the top step, clutching the suitcase handle so hard her knuckles whitened. Her breath came shallow, uneven. Somewhere deep inside, the thought rose cold and certain. This is the end of my life. The rain slid down her cheeks, and she let it because it was easier than tears. The wagon waited at the edge of the yard, its wheels sunk in mud. Clara stood on the porch, suitcase handle biting into her palm. She expected to hear her father bark again, but the door behind her stayed closed. From the wagon a man stepped down. He was broad-shouldered, rain dripping from his coat, hat pulled low. His voice came steady, quiet. "I'm Daniel Cooper. Your father sent word." Clara nodded, unable to answer. "You don't have to," he said. His eyes met hers without force, only calm. "Only come if you want to." The words startled her more than his presence. No one had ever given her such a choice. She thought of the small house behind her, the whiskey smell, her father's slurred voice, burden. The word rang like a chain. She stepped forward. Daniel opened the wagon door, holding it steady as she climbed in. She kept the suitcase on her lap, clutching it like a shield. The wood bench was cold, the lantern above swaying with each drop of rain. Daniel took the reins, and the horse moved them slowly down the road. They rode in silence for a long stretch. The night smelled of wet soil and smoke from distant chimneys. Clara watched the fields slip by, the last pieces of her childhood vanishing in the mist. Her throat ached, but she held herself still. "If you're cold," Daniel said at last, "there's a blanket behind you." Clara glanced at the folded wool but didn't touch it. Just the offer unsettled her, gentle, almost kind. "You've been crying," he said. She turned sharply away. "I'm fine." He didn't press, only guided the horse with steady hands. When she dared to look at him, his face was calm, weathered, nothing cruel. Not like the men she had known. His voice was low when he spoke again. "Your father asked. That's why I came. But I'd have done it anyway. No one deserves to be cast off." Clara's grip loosened on the suitcase. His words sat inside her like a seed, strange, unfamiliar, but alive. The wagon rolled on, carrying her into the unknown. For the first time in years, Clara felt a faint, fragile flicker. Not safety, not yet, but the possibility of it. The road bent toward rising hills, and by the time the horse slowed, Clara had almost dozed. Her body jerked awake when the wagon stopped. Daniel climbed down, then offered his hand. She hesitated, but the rain had turned the ground slick, and pride gave way to balance. His palm was calloused, steady, the brief touch strangely reassuring. The farmhouse stood at the end of a lane, its windows glowing amber through the mist. Clara had imagined something bleak. Rotting boards, sour straw, the stench of animals. Instead she found walls freshly painted, shutters neat, and a porch swept clean. A dog barked once and then quieted, tail wagging as Daniel gave a soft command. Inside, warmth wrapped around her at once. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and wood smoke. Herbs hung drying along the rafters, their shadows trembling in lantern light. A row of books filled a shelf above a narrow table polished by years of use. Clara blinked. This did not look like a poor man's house, not the prison she had braced herself for. Daniel set her suitcase near the stairs. You can take the room at the back. It's small, but it's yours. Yours. The word struck her like something foreign. She nodded, throat tight, and followed him through the narrow hall. The room was simple. A bed with a quilt, a washstand, a single vase holding dried lavender. The scent was faint but sweet. Clara placed her hand on the quilt, tracing the stitches. You'll want rest, Daniel said, stopping at the doorway. That's enough for now. He left her in silence. Clara sat on the bed, the weight of the day pressing down all at once. She had expected command, mockery, maybe worse. Instead, she had been met with nothing but space, permission to breathe. The strangeness of it unsettled her more than cruelty might have. Later, when she crept back to the kitchen, Daniel was seated at the table, mending a strap with a quiet patience. He glanced up, not startled, only nodding toward the pot on the stove. There's stew if you're hungry. Clara moved cautiously, ladling broth into a bowl. She burned her tongue on the first sip and winced. Daniel said nothing, only returned to his work. The silence was not heavy. It left room for her to exist without judgment. Through the small window, the moon rose pale above the fields. Clara leaned against the table, spoon cooling in her hand. Slowly, her shoulders eased. She studied the shelves lined with books, titles worn, spines cracked, yet cared for. Not the life she had pictured for a man labeled farmer, in her father's bitter tone. Why books? She asked, surprising herself. Daniel shrugged lightly. Company. Some days better than people. A faint smile tugged at her lips before she could stop it. When she set her empty bowl in the sink, Daniel spoke again, quiet but certain. No rush here. You don't have to prove anything. The words settled deep. Clara felt tears rise, unbidden. She turned quickly toward the hall, but not before Daniel looked up. He didn't call after her, didn't ask. He only let her go. In the small room, Clara lay under the lavender-scented quilt. The rain had stopped, replaced by crickets and the faint creak of old timbers. For the first time in years, she closed her eyes without bracing for the sound of her father's boots or the slam of his voice. The house was quiet, safe, and though her heart still ached with fear, Clara felt the first fragile thread of something she hadn't dared believe in home. The first morning, Clara tried to make bread. She had watched her mother often enough, kneading flour and water with swift, certain hands. But when Clara pulled the loaf from the oven, its crust was burned black, the inside still raw. She froze, waiting for scorn, for laughter. Daniel only lifted the pan, tapped the bottom of the loaf, and shook his head with a faint smile. Looks like my first try. I nearly broke a tooth on it. Clara blinked at him, uncertain if he mocked her. But his grin was quiet, harmless, and soon she found herself giving a small laugh, the first that had escaped her in months. The days began to form a rhythm. Clara swept floors, hung laundry, tried her hand at soups that often turned bitter. Each failure tightened her stomach, but Daniel never raised his voice. Instead, he told his own clumsy stories, of dropping eggs on the floor, of spilling an entire jar of honey, of once letting the cow loose in the orchard. His tone carried no shame, only amusement. Slowly, Clara began to believe mistakes were not punishable here. In the afternoons, she wandered into the yard. A patch of flowers grew near the fence, half wild but stubbornly bright. Clara knelt among them, brushing soil from her hands, humming under her breath. At first she startled when she realized she was singing, as though her father might roar from the porch. But no one stopped her. Daniel passed once with a bucket, pausing only to say, "That suits the place," before walking on. Nights were the hardest. Clara would lie awake beneath the quilt, heart racing, waiting for anger that never came. The silence pressed heavy, but gradually, that too began to soften. She started leaving her door unlatched, trusting the quiet. One evening, she carried a basket of herbs inside. Daniel was at the table mending harness straps. The smell of thyme and sage filled the room. Clara placed the basket down and hesitated. "I used to help my mother with teas," she said, her voice almost shy. Daniel looked up. "Then you'll know more than me. I just boil water and hope it tastes decent." Clara smiled faintly. She brewed a pot, pouring into 2 chipped mugs. They drank in silence. The warmth of the cup seeped into her palms, and she realized her hands had stopped trembling. The changes were small, nearly invisible. She no longer flinched at every movement. She began to leave her hair loose, to walk barefoot across the kitchen floor. Once, while cleaning, she caught her reflection in the window. Her shoulders no longer curled inward, her gaze no longer darting like a cornered animal. The sight startled her. She almost didn't recognize herself. Weeks passed. Clara learned which herbs sweetened stew, how long to let bread rise, how to steady her hands when milking the cow. She laughed more often, sometimes at herself, sometimes at Daniel's quiet humor. He never demanded it, never reached for more than she offered. His presence was steady, like the tick of the clock on the mantel. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the wooden table, Clara found herself singing while tending the flowers. Her voice wavered, uncertain, then grew stronger. The dog lay in the shade, tail thumping lazily. Daniel leaned in the doorway, listening without interrupting. When she finally noticed him, she flushed and fell silent. "Don't stop," he said. His tone was simple, unadorned. "It's good to hear." Clara looked down at her hands, soil clinging to her fingers, but a smile broke across her face. Unforced, unhidden. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of being seen. Clara had grown used to the rhythm of Daniel's life. Mornings in the fields, evenings mending tools or reading by the fire. Yet there were moments that unsettled her. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, he would sit at the table and write for hours. Thick envelopes piled neatly, addressed in a hand too careful for a simple farmer. Each week he sealed them, carried them into town, and posted them away. She never asked. Questions still caught in her throat like stones. But she noticed. One autumn afternoon, the leaves turning gold, a stranger came up the lane. His shoes were too polished for mud, his coat fine wool. Clara was in the yard hanging laundry when he tipped his hat. "Good afternoon, miss. I'm looking for Daniel Cooper." Her chest tightened. "He's in the barn." The man nodded, but as he adjusted his satchel, a slip of paper fell to the ground. Clara bent before he could stop her. A headline glared up at her in bold black ink. "Agribusiness tycoon Daniel Cooper disappears after scandal." Her breath caught. For a moment the world tilted. She read the name again, certain her eyes deceived her. Daniel Cooper, tycoon, millionaire. The letters blurred. The man snatched the paper back with an embarrassed cough. "Apologies." He hurried toward the barn, leaving Clara frozen by the line of drying sheets that flapped like white sails in the wind. She stood rooted long after the stranger vanished inside. The Daniel she knew, quiet, steady, patient, was not the man in that headline. Yet the words gnawed at her. Disappears after scandal. That evening, Daniel came in late, his coat dusted with hay. He set his gloves on the table, but Clara couldn't look at him. The question clawed inside her until it tore free. "Who are you?" Daniel paused. His expression did not harden, but the stillness in the room deepened. "I told you, I'm Daniel Cooper." "No," Clara said, her voice sharp, shaking. "Not the man who mends harness straps and laughs when I burn bread. Not the man who gives me a room and tells me I can rest. That man doesn't send thick envelopes. That man isn't in the newspapers." Silence stretched. The fire crackled. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat, folding his hands on the table. His eyes, when they met hers, were steady. "I wasn't hiding money," he said quietly. "I was hiding from life." Clara's breath hitched. He spoke slowly, each word measured. "I built a company once. Fields turned into factories. People trusted me, and I believed success would shield me from loss. But then my wife fell ill. All the wealth in the world couldn't buy her another year. When she died, the house felt like stone around me. So I walked away, Left it all, the company, the headlines, the noise. I came here because I couldn't breathe anywhere else. Clara's throat burned. She wanted to mistrust him, to cling to suspicion. Yet his voice carried no pretense. Only weariness. You should have told me, she whispered. I thought it didn't matter, he said. You never asked about money. You saw me as a man, not as what I lost or owned. That was the first mercy I'd known in years. Clara looked away, torn between betrayal and something deeper, recognition. She had believed her father's words, that she was nothing but a burden cast away. And yet here sat a man who had once held everything, who had abandoned riches to live quietly, who now admitted she was the first person to make him want to breathe again. Her heart pounded. Truth had split the world open between them. She didn't know if she could cross it. But in Daniel's steady gaze, she saw no deception, only the raw edges of a broken past. Clara could not sleep that night. The words from the newspaper headline burned in her mind. Millionaire. Scandal. Disappeared. She turned under the quilt, the lavender scent no longer soothing. Daniel's confession echoed. I wasn't hiding money. I was hiding from life. Before dawn, she rose and found him already outside, splitting wood. His axe fell clean, steady, as though the rhythm itself kept him alive. She stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, before finally speaking. Why didn't you fight for it? The company, the life you built. Daniel rested the axe against the block. His breath clouded in the cold air. Because none of it mattered when she was gone. Clara descended the steps slowly. Your wife. He nodded. Her name was Eleanor. She loved music, hated the smell of tobacco, always planted roses too close together. When the doctor said there was nothing left to try, she looked at me and smiled like she was comforting me. His voice cracked, but he kept it low. I buried her, and the silence afterward was louder than any scandal. Clara's chest tightened. She thought of her own mother, fading in silence while her father drowned himself in bottles. Loss was something she understood, though she had never spoken of it aloud. Daniel picked up the axe again but did not swing. He looked at her, eyes steady but hollow. The scandal was business. Accusations, boardroom knives. They said I turned my back on responsibility. Maybe I did. But the truth? I walked away before it could eat me alive. Money builds walls, but it doesn't fill an empty chair at the table. The wind rattled the bare branches overhead. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter. And now, he leaned on the axe handle. Now I fix fences, tend soil, read when the nights are long. It's quieter here. I thought I wanted to disappear. Then you came. The words unsettled her. I didn't choose this. My father, he pushed me out. Daniel shook his head. Maybe, but you stayed. You could have turned back that first night. You didn't. Clara looked down, mud clinging to her boots. I didn't know where else to go. Sometimes, Daniel said gently, that's enough reason to stay. The silence stretched between them. Not empty, weighted, fragile. Clara felt her throat tighten, the old fear rising. What if he left too? What if kindness, like everything else, was only borrowed? Daniel set the axe aside and stepped closer, his hands rough, hanging at his sides as though he was careful not to reach for her. I won't lie to you, Clara. I don't know how to be anything but broken. But when you laugh, when you sing to those flowers, it's the first time I've wanted to breathe again. Her eyes stung. She wanted to resist, to remind herself she was nothing but a burden, as her father had said. Yet Daniel's words struck deeper than the insult ever had. She pressed a hand to her mouth, afraid the sound of her sob would escape. Daniel's voice softened further. I don't need you to fix me. Just stay as you are. That's enough. Clara lowered her hand slowly. The man before her was not the figure from the newspaper. No tycoon, no scandal, no riches. Just a man who had lost, who carried his grief like a scar. And somehow, in that grief, she recognized her own. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe his kindness was not pity. It was truth. The harvest festival came with crisp air and lanterns strung across the town square. Clara walked beside Daniel, the smell of roasted corn and apples drifting between them. Children darted past with ribbons, laughter ringing like bells. Clara clutched her shawl, unsure if she belonged among such brightness. Daniel greeted neighbors with quiet nods. Nothing more. To them, he was simply the farmer from the edge of town. Not a tycoon, not a headline, just Daniel. That ordinariness had become a shield, and Clara found she wanted to keep it for him. Music rose, fiddles sharp against the night. Couples spun, skirts sweeping dust. Daniel glanced at her. "Do you dance?" Clara shook her head quickly. "I'd only step on your boots." He smiled faintly. "Then we'll keep to the edges." He offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed her palm in his. They moved slowly, not quite in rhythm, but she found herself laughing when she stumbled. The sound startled her, free, unguarded. Daniel's smile deepened as though it were enough. Later, when the crowd thinned, he led her toward the fields. The moon hung low, silvering the stalks of wheat. The air was quiet, hushed, like the world was waiting. Daniel stopped, reached into his pocket, then knelt in the soil. Clara's breath caught. In his hand was no diamond, no gold. Only a small ring braided from wheat stalks, simple, fragile, glowing pale in the moonlight. "I don't need riches," Daniel said. His voice was steady, though his eyes shone. "I don't need boardrooms or headlines. I need you, as you are. No more, no less." Clara pressed her hand to her lips. The earth tilted, her chest tight with fear and something fiercer, hope. She saw not the man from newspapers, but the one who laughed at burned bread, who mended harness straps, who let her sing without shame. "Yes," she whispered, the word trembling out of her before doubt could stop it. "Yes." Daniel slid the fragile ring onto her finger. It fit loosely, but Clara held her hand as though it were the most precious thing she'd ever owned. They stood together in the field, the dog bounding through the stalks, the night around them vast and quiet. Years passed. Clara often thought of that night when she watched their daughter run through the sunflower fields, hair catching the light. The farmhouse still smelled of herbs and wood smoke. Books still lined the shelves, and laughter came more easily now. Daniel worked the soil with steady hands, and in the evenings they sat together by the fire, silence no longer heavy but full of belonging. Sometimes, Clara remembered the night she left her father's house, suitcase clutched, rain on her cheeks. She had been certain it was the end of her life. But standing at the edge of the fields, watching her daughter chase butterflies, she knew the truth. What had begun as punishment, as exile, had become her greatest blessing. The ring of wheat had long since crumbled, but Clara kept it in a small wooden box. Fragile, humble, more precious than jewels. Because it held not wealth, but the memory of a choice. The moment someone had looked at her and said the words that changed everything. "Only come if you want to," and she had.